Welcome to the real life show, Living with a Chronic Illness. We are your hosts, Cassie and Chelsea. I'm Cassie, a single mom living with a chronic illness who is extremely passionate about living a full and happy life.
And I'm Chelsea. I have a passion for helping people to put themselves first and to be the best version of themselves each and every day.
We came together to create the Spoonies Hub, an uplifting community that offers resources, guidance, support, and offers you the space to be yourself, be heard, and feel understood. We hope that by providing tips and tricks from experts, we help people with chronic conditions to thrive and live the lives they've dreamed of.
This show is not only for those who live with a chronic illness or disability, but their friends, family, spouses, and just anyone else existing on the earth. Our goal is to normalize having a chronic condition by sharing real stories with real people and to show the world how relatable those everyday struggles can be. There's a little something in here for everyone.
And a special shout out to our community at the Spoonies Hub. Thanks to your contributions, we are able to provide flexible work opportunities for Spoonies, donate to our nonprofit to help provide wellness treatments for those who need it, and be able to transcribe our podcast to make it more accessible for all. To learn more, visit our show notes.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the real life show, Living with a Chronic Illness, where we have another freaking fantastic interview for you with the one and only Kerry Jeffery. Kerry is a clinical hypnotherapist, counselor, and life coach working exclusively online with clients all over the world to help them overcome the complex emotional issues of living with chronic illness using her unique therapy programs. Kerry lives with 4 autoimmune diseases: Hashimoto's, celiac, antiphospholipid syndrome, and most recently, type 1 diabetes. When she developed Hashimoto's over 6 years ago, Kerry was physically and cognitively disabled, with no idea if she would live or ever be able to work and support herself and her family again. Recognizing that the profound emotional and psychological impacts of chronic illness go completely acknowledged by the medical community, Kerry created Moving Through the Grief of Chronic Illness, which takes the reader through the key emotional responses and challenges that are part of the process of adapting to life with chronic illness. This ebook is a free resource that is available by joining her VIP email list on her website. Kerry's Emotional Autoimmunity podcast speaks to the key emotional challenges that we face living with chronic illness, including guilt, trauma, how to speak with others about your chronic illness, and her own experiences. She lives in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, with her 19-year-old son and loves walking, reading a great fantasy series, and dancing in the kitchen.
Cassie and I had an amazing time talking to Kerry. Her story left us both literally just staring at our screens with our jaw hanging open, processing everything she was telling us. It will make everyone out there who has experienced medical gaslighting and having to advocate for yourself feel very heard. And she has a great example of how advocating for yourself can be very, very important. And make sure you listen all the way to the end, because the last 5 or 10 minutes, Kerry dropped some serious gold and you need to listen to it. Yeah. Maybe even twice or 3 times.
This was good. A really great freaking podcast episode.
So listen to it all. Let us know what you think and enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the real life show, Living with a Chronic Illness. Today, Cassie and I are joined by Kerry Jeffery. Hi, Kerry. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Chelsea and Cassie. It's so good to meet up with you girls.
Yay. Well, Kerry, will you start off by telling our listeners all about yourself, your story, and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Okay. Well, I live in Melbourne, Australia. So it's always fun organising these things. It's 7 o'clock in the morning for me on Tuesday. So my story.
It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Central Standard Time for Cassie and I. So I love that you're coming to us from the future. It's so fun.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the future is good. The future is good.
Yay! All right, your story.
So I really had very little knowledge about chronic illness at all. It was not on my radar until it happened to me. And I think that's what happens with most people. I know I have a cousin with Graves' disease, and I knew that she was really, really sick with it and she became disabled. It was like, oh yeah, I had all the empathy, but just no understanding about what it's like. And then about just over 6 years ago, I got what I thought was a really bad flu. And I was one of those people that never got sick. So hello, it should have been a sign, like, overactive immune system already going on. And I just continued to get worse and worse and worse and worse until the point I was actually sitting on the couch one day and I fell over sideways. I couldn't hold my body up. And then I'd gained this massive amount of weight all around my waist. My hair started falling out. My face started swelling up with fluid. My eyelids were resting down on top of the lashes and were all swollen. I didn't even look like myself. It was one of those moments where you look in the mirror and you think, I don't even recognize this person. And I'll never forget the look on my father's face when he came over and I opened the door, because he just looked so shocked. And so I made an appointment with my doctor and he sent me off for some blood tests. And I was feeling like death. I actually was feeling like I was dying. And he rang me the next day, which was pretty amazing, and said, look, Kerry, I know what you've got. It's very easy to treat, come in and we'll get you sorted. I'm thinking, oh, thank God, it's some sort of really bad virus, something like that. And I went in and he told me on the phone that my thyroid had failed. And I thought, oh, thyroid failed. So I started doing a little bit of research, and thyroid failed equals hypothyroid. So we're sitting there and he just said, your thyroid's dead. Basically, we don't know why it happens. It just happens to some people. We're going to put you on thyroid hormone replacement. You're going to have to get used to your new normal. And I was sitting there like barely able to breathe or function. I was in so much pain that I was disabled. I hadn't been able to work. I could barely think. My whole voice had changed, so it was really deep, and I sounded like I was drunk, so I was slurry. I had brain fog, so I knew what I wanted, but I couldn't think of the word, and it was something simple like salt. So I would have to point to what I wanted because the words just wouldn't come. I felt like all of my back was just on fire and in pain, like the soles of my feet felt like someone had bashed them with a steel pipe. They just felt bruised and swollen, and I was a mess. And for him just to say, accept your new normal, I just thought, God, I feel like I'm dying and you're not going to help me.
Yeah, that sounds like way more than a thyroid issue. I am not a doctor or a medical expert in any way, shape, or form, but that just sounds like way more than a thyroid issue to me.
Well, and plus, talk about hopeless, just hey, this is life now. Accept it. Moving on. I mean, that's not encouraging at all, or hopeful, or feeling supported or cared for.
It was devastating, absolutely devastating, Cassie, because I'd seen these doctors. It was a husband and wife team. And like I said, I rarely went to the doctors, but I'd been in and out of there for 10 years with my children. So they knew me very well. And they knew I was a no-nonsense sort of practical person. And they knew what I looked like normally and how I functioned. And I'm sitting there saying, how can a major organ just fail? That doesn't make sense. Why would that happen? He said, we don't know. And I said, is there anything else I can do? Not that I'm aware of. And then he told me I had Graves' disease. And I'm like, hang on, my cousin's got Graves' disease. I know that's overactive. I've got the opposite of that. Isn't that Hashimoto's? So then he had an argument with me about that. And I knew when I walked out of there, it was going to be up to me. He was not going to help me. And if somebody thinks that disabled, when you've seen somebody who's been vibrant and healthy go to disabled and you just say, get used to your new normal, I thought the only person who's going to save me is me. And that's the way it is. And so he just gave me levothyroxine. When I got a copy of my test results, which luckily I was able to get from them, I saw that my TSH was 118. My thyroid levels were basically non-existent, and you do need thyroid hormones to function because every cell in our body has a receptor for T3. It's one of the powerhouses of the cell. So, and I knew that people could actually die from it. You could go into a coma. If you get bad enough, you can go into a coma and die. And I think I was pretty close to that. So I started looking for someone who would help me. And it was one of those serendipitous sort of moments, because I joined this Facebook thyroid support group. And I was mentioning that one of the issues I had, that my toes were really swollen. And somebody came in and said, oh, I've got that. That's actually how my naturopath diagnosed my Hashimoto's, because my toes were swollen. I'm like, wow, I'm looking for a naturopath. It happened that she lived in a suburb near me, and the naturopath wasn't far away, which was amazing, because most of the sport groups I'm in tend to be either US dominated, or there's very few Australians in there. So the chances of finding someone who lived near me with someone who was accessible to me was very slim. So, and I never heard from her again. It was just like she was a little angel that was dropped in. And so from my naturopath, he gave me the name of this doctor. He didn't know her, but said he'd heard she was quite good. So I made an appointment with her and just sort of sat down with her and said, look, this is what I have. I know what I want to do. I want to try this thyroid replacement, that it's not on the PBS. I've done a lot of research. I'm looking for someone who's going to partner with me. I want to get the best possible health that I can. And she said, I have no issues with that. So that was sort of the beginning of me recovering my health from there. So going from physically and cognitively disabled, like my worst case scenario was, if I can't get better, and basically both of my doctors just said, look, this is going to be a long recovery. And my second doctor said, you are dangerously ill, Kerry. You literally could die. Do not walk fast. Do not exert yourself. You are the worst Hashimoto's patient I have ever seen. And so in a way, that was like validation, like dangerously ill, because I knew there was something bad and I felt like I was dying. But at the same time, like, oh my God, dangerously ill, like, and nobody could tell me what was going to be possible. Like, they couldn't even tell me if I'd be able to recover. So my worst case scenario would be that I would have to give up the rental property that we're in and put everything in storage. My eldest son would move out. My youngest son would have to go and live with his dad. And I would have to move in with my own elderly father and try and apply for some form of disability, which is here in Australia, as I understand the cases in the US, it's really hard to get and it's really hard to prove. So I was looking down the barrel of that future in my mid-50s. And up until then, like, I had everything planned out in my life and everything was going great. And I was in the middle of writing a book and I started to become well known as, a therapist dealing with the adult children of toxic parents and helping them overcome all of that sort of stuff. So I was starting to really, get this expert status going on, and then boom, I'm game over. No idea. And it was like the universe had just come down and just wiped my life off the table. And all that was left was this uncertainty. And then along the way, we tested for celiac disease, and I had that as well. And then in the last 6 months, I ended up being hospitalized in the ICU with type 1 diabetes, which I had no idea that adults could get. I wrongly thought that it was a juvenile disease, but I should have known because it is autoimmune. So I'm now getting used to being insulin dependent type 1 diabetic. So it's been quite a journey.
Wow.
I mean,
for everyone listening, both Cassie are just sitting here with our mouths open trying to process.
I know. I was kind of like,
I
know. I told myself, I was like, am I breathing? Because I'm like, wow.
Kerry, you, like, seeing you on, and I know everyone listening can't see you, but you have this very calm energy about you, this very confident, this very like put together. We talk about this all the time. You would never know, looking at you, that you've been through all this, some of them fairly recently. Like the hospitalization for type 1 diabetes sounds very, very recent, but you seem to have overcome that with this positive outlook on life.
I've gained a lot of tools and skills over the years. So I was a therapist before all of this happened to me. And one of the biggest shocks for me, because I think I was born to be a counselor. Like I've always wanted to help people in emotional pain all of my life. It's just been a passion of mine. And the biggest shock for me, which I know you guys will probably relate to, but when you get chronic illness, it's like you've lost yourself, right? You've lost your old self, all of the things that you used to be able to do. And not only that, you've lost the future that you thought you were going to have. And there's now all it's replaced it is all this uncertainty, right? And unlike other illnesses, like our model for illness is you get sick and you get better, or you get sick and you die. That's it. Mm-hmm. There's no real understanding in our communities or in our conversations about this whole area where we are, which is chronic illness, which is ongoing and often progressive. So I needed some way to deal with this radical change in my life and all of the uncertainty that came along. So I started looking online for some sort of emotional help or psychological help, or, the emotions of chronic illness. And there was nothing. There was nothing out there. In fact, even today, there are very few people who do therapy, especially the sort of therapy I do, that actually have chronic illness themselves and have been through the experience, so they understand all of the emotional challenges. And so I just started talking to people that I knew and spent a lot of time crying, because when I was first ill, I just cried all the time, and I'm not a crier. I'm not a person who likes a public cry or anything. I'm a very, even though I come across very confident and all of that, I'm actually a classic introvert. So I tend to try and keep those things private. But I was just so low and so devastated and so lost. And it was like being dumped in the middle of a strange country without knowing the language, without a map and a compass, and nobody to tell you what to do except take your thyroxine. That was it. Take your thyroxine. And I ended up in hospital taking my thyroxine on heart monitors, because one of the biggest issues I had with my thyroid levels so low was that my heart was having trouble continuing to function. It was fine. My heart was very healthy, no blockages, had everything checked. But the low levels of thyroid and my body being so low and being so dangerously ill, I would get chest pain. So it would feel like a hand was squeezing my heart and then letting go, and radiating chest pain. I was taken to hospital 2 or 3 times, and it was always worse at the night. And you guys know what that's like. At nighttime, you're lying there awake, everything's worse. And I was just losing my mind. My anxiety was just so high. I was experiencing rolling physiological panic attacks that are very different from emotional panic attacks, because I'd had those in my younger years and learnt techniques and ways to deal with that. But I was having these ongoing panic attacks in my body that I could do nothing about. I couldn't think my way out of them or talk my way out of them. And I thought, I've got to find something that I can do to help myself. And that's basically where all of my techniques and all of my therapies and stuff started to come from. And then talking to other people, people who'd had chronic illness for a long time, and just saying, how do you deal with it? How do you wrap your mind around that, the fact that so much has changed? How do you deal with flares? And from there, I started researching more positive stories, because this is probably your experience as well. When you first start doing your research, it is just a minefield of terror. You hear from people that have got your diseases, and they're they're either wanting to commit suicide, or they're disabled, or they've got no quality of life, or they're in despair or deep depression. And I just didn't have the emotional resources to deal with that or be exposed to that. So I started searching for more positive people, living well with chronic illness, topics like that. And that led me to Dr. Terry Walls. And I saw her YouTube video on minding your mitochondria. And that was how she changed her diet to help with her MS. And as a doctor and a researcher, that really appealed to me. And I thought, finally, somebody's giving me something I can do to help myself. And that was when the great self-experiment began.
Okay. So much of what you were saying, I resonate with so much. I mean, I found myself almost in tears with like a lot of what you said, because Chelsea knows I have really not been feeling good today, all since the minute I woke up pretty much. And even I was texting Chelsea and she even said, do we need to cancel our interview this afternoon? Because I was just like, I'm not sure if I can get through the day. And about an hour later, I was able to turn things around, and obviously here we are. But I mean, a couple of things that really stood out to me from your story. I really appreciate that you said when you get your chronic illness diagnosis or when you become chronically ill, because not everyone gets a diagnosis. But when that happens to you, I have read so much about people grieving the loss of who they were. And perhaps me being relatively young when I got my diagnosis, I didn't seem to feel as much of that grieving the loss of who I was, but the uncertainty of the future and the stress and grieving the loss of the future I thought I was going to have and the life I had planned out. I mean, you just hit the nail right on the head. And it still is a constant practice. And I even was having a conversation with my stepdad, and I can't even remember what we were talking about, but it came down to where I said, I've been pretty good now at, I let things go and I just kind of go with the flow. I'm pretty good about that because you never know what's going to happen. And I think it might've been in reference with the pandemic. But he said, he's like, yeah, you are pretty, you're pretty good at that. And I said, well, because living with a chronic illness, I don't know if I'm not going to be able to work in a couple months. I don't know what next year looks like. I don't know if I'm going to have surgery. I don't know. So I just sometimes do have to like live in the moment, try to plan in the sense of I like to save financially because I'm like, yeah, it could be that I can't work. That's exactly what happened. Last year, I was working a lot and I put money away because I was like, what if? And then this year, a lot of the time I've hardly been able to work. So that really stuck out to me. And then finding a therapy or counseling professional who understands chronic illness themselves is huge. I didn't have that either until I moved to Kansas, and I was looking on my approved provider list on my insurance of counselors, and I stumbled upon one, and I was just kind of like, I kind of liked the name of it, and I just like intuitively was like, I'm going to call this one. And I made an appointment and I just felt good about it. And in the first session, I was talking to the lady, giving her a little bit of my history. And she told me that she doesn't usually share much about herself in her therapy sessions, but that she had overcome kidney cancer and had had a kidney transplant. And one of the medications that she was on to treat her cancer was one of the chemotherapy medications that they were using to treat my Crohn's at the time. And I just started sobbing because I was like, oh my God, not only does she get what it's like to live with a chronic illness, but she's even been on the same medications. I hadn't met in person anyone who had. And so I said to her, oh my gosh, do you feel that? Did you ever feel that feeling when you take Remicade of like, you feel like your body has been plugged into a plug socket and electricity and you're like, ugh, and like buzzing like your whole body? And she's like, yes, that's the worst. It would last for days. And I just started sobbing like, oh my God, she knows that feeling. And that sense of connection was a little bit life-changing for me in that moment, because just like you, I couldn't find community that I wanted. And it was so depressing sometimes to get on some of those Facebook groups or reach out. And it made me feel really hopeless. Then it made me feel guilty for feeling like my situation was difficult when someone else's might have been. It wasn't super healthy. And it's definitely part of why Chelsea and I have tried to do what we're doing, is we really want to create an uplifting community, which doesn't mean that you can't be in your woes, but one has to live with this illness. You have to learn how to overcome and have joy, like you said, and living well. And we need more tools and resources and help and guidance of how to do that, which is why we're here doing what we are today. But gosh, your story is, I mean, heart-wrenching to go from that place where literally it was like kind of death was knocking. And you said, I'm not letting you in. And you kept going. That's inspiring.
Oh, thank you. I think that's the reason I started emotional autoimmunity, because nobody was talking about what it's really like. And I found that even though I got to meet a lot of fantastic people in the chronic illness community, and a lot of, the leaders and people that I admired who are really wonderful, I found that some of the people that I followed, sort of once they reached a certain level, and whether it was using a specific diet or whatever, they sort of stopped talking about their chronic illness, like it didn't impact their lives anymore. And so it stopped becoming inspirational, aspirational for me, and it started becoming, well, hang on, I've got this, I'm doing what they're doing. Why do I still feel so bad? Like, why am I still having flares? Why am I still not able to do what they're doing? And I think that's, and that's a big issue with a lot of the online support groups as well, because if you deal with one or join one with like specific diets or specific beliefs, whether it's a vitamin regimen or whether it's, some sort of dietary protocol or iodine or whatever it is, the people in there get so rigid that their way is the only way. And so if you're not getting better, you're not doing it right. And so they'll attack you and put you down. And so you've got to be very selective in how you dip in and out of groups. So I quickly sort of learned to just go in, get the specific information that I wanted, and then not engage or not share too much about anything else. But it's more that emotional ongoing thing, exactly what you were saying, Cassie, that every day becomes completely unpredictable. So at my worst, I could go through multiple changes a day. So I could wake up feeling good, an hour later feel like I'm going to pass out and vomit, and then come a little bit better, and then be full of energy, and then be exhausted and want to fall asleep, and anything in between. And
in like 6 hours, all of that can take place.
Exactly. And now a similar sort of thing with the type 1 diabetes, because it's almost impossible to do the work of a major organ, like to replace a pancreas with needles and injections of insulin. No matter how determined or scientific or whatever it is, it's still challenging. And so, low blood sugars can kill you, literally, and high blood sugars can cause, organ damage, and, for long-term people that it has serious consequences. So I'm kind of glad that the type 1 diabetes wasn't my first chronic illness or autoimmune disease that I got, because I don't think I would have coped with it as well as I have. And the only reason I'm coping with it is because of my previous experience and using all the tools and stuff that I teach my clients, and doing all of that work. Because when I got that, even that was atypical, because for the Hashimoto's, when I get my autoimmune diseases, I tend to seem to be running like pretty well functioning, and then boom, like it's really serious, because my doctor says I have this incredible tolerance for stuff. I don't know that. I wouldn't say I'm like very tolerant to pain or anything like that, but she said that your body has a tendency to pretty much keep going normally until it just can't anymore. And so I had, with the type 1 diabetes, very atypical symptoms. So the normal symptoms of type 1 diabetes are like excessive thirst, excessive urination, sweet smelling breath, a lot of weight loss, headaches and things like that. I had none of those. It started with constipation, of all things, which is something that if you have Hashimoto's or celiac, as I do, gut issues and it's slowing down the digestive tract can be an ongoing issue, regardless of how good your diet is. So I just did what I normally did. I took my laxatives I got from my naturopath, but it didn't do the trick as it normally would. And it got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I felt so sick I couldn't eat. I had no appetite. I had this terrible taste in my mouth all the time. And then COVID was going on, right? So couldn't see my doctor. It was all telehealth or phone consults. I started losing an enormous amount of weight very rapidly. And prior to that, I'd changed my diet to carnivore and was feeling amazing, like the best I'd ever felt. And I reached a healthy weight and size, and I was building muscle, feeling really great. And then this big decline started. And she sent me along for an x-ray, and the x-ray showed that my left side colon was completely blocked. And we're like thinking, okay, that's the issue. Like, you've got this really bad obstruction. That's why you can't eat. But it got worse and worse to the point where the weight was literally melting off me, and I became skin and bones, and I couldn't get out of bed. And so I got my family to come and intervene and help me. And my son had to carry me out to the car and take me to emergency because I couldn't walk. And in there, eventually, after 5 days of intensive care, they said, you've got type 1 diabetes. And I'm like, no, I've got a blocked bowel. Like, I've got an x-ray. I don't have any of the signs of diabetes. And they start giving me insulin, and they start wanting to give me all of these drugs. And so I'm having to advocate really strongly for myself. Doctors wouldn't talk to me. They would yell at me. So I had some very terrible times, and I was literally skin and bone, and I lost a lot of muscle. So for the first time in my life, I was physically frail. Like to the point I could barely walk because I had so little muscle in my body. And that was a real challenge to overcome that. So it took a second round of hospital for me to finally get the evidence I needed, which was antibodies, the diabetic antibodies, to say, okay, now I'm willing to accept it. You've given me the right information. I'm just going to, this is what I've got. It's up to me. I've got to do the best that I can to look after that. So that was literally 4 months ago.
Gosh.
I think it's interesting that it took 2 hospital visits for the doctors to give you the antibodies, or to show you the information that you had the type 1 diabetes antibody.
Yeah.
I'm like, why couldn't that have happened on the first round? Because I totally understand coming from a place of, okay, you're telling me I have a diagnosis. You want me to take these medications. Do I really have to take these medications? Are you sure? I would be the same way. I'd be like, no, prove to me, show me the data, the information that you're seeing that's making you think that I have type 1 diabetes. Don't just scream in my face saying you have it. I would want that proof too. And it kind of blows my mind that doctors that's not what they did the first time. It took 2 hospitals.
Exactly. And they did explain, like, they hadn't even run a test. They decided based on the ketones in my blood and my blood sugar level that was their diagnosis. And I was like, hang on, I've been running on ketones for 12 months. I've been on a very low carbohydrate diet. I don't burn sugar, I burn ketones. I would expect to have high levels of ketone in my blood. I haven't been able to eat for literally 3 months. That's why I've lost weight. I've got an x-ray to show my bowel is blocked. So I had all of this evidence. And as I'm arguing with this team of endocrinologists, like little frail me in a wheelchair, little frail me with them yelling at me, they took away my thyroid hormones in the hospital because they didn't know what they were. And I'm like,
wait, what?
How can you do that? Like, I've got that. I've got a prescription for that. I've paid. I got that from a compounding chemist. It is a legal prescription for a diagnosis I actually have that has been proven that I've been living with. And if you take that away, like, you're worried about me dying of diabetes, if you take away my thyroid hormones, that is going to impact me. All right. So they were just so high-handed. And so I'm having this big screaming match, and I'm saying, okay, well, they were screaming. I was trying to stay calm. I was saying, all right, if this is type 1 diabetes, it's autoimmune, show me the antibodies. Show me the antibodies and I'll believe you. And then, I will have to run a test for that.
Yes, you will.
And
like
so
you normally do for everything.
That will take, about 5 days. So
does it really take 5 days?
But the interesting thing was, because they wouldn't give me that proof, and because I felt like, okay, just get my bowel working, and my bowel started working again. And I'm like, why is nobody doing anything about my bowel? That
right,
started
because
working
that's a
again.
problem too.
Yeah.
Being
Well, if you're
an
so
obstruction.
full,
Yeah.
you can't eat, right? There's nothing able to go through. So of course, I went home, and because they hadn't proved to me that I had diabetes, I stopped taking insulin, right? Because insulin is not a what do you call it? It does things, right? So if you're taking insulin when there's no need to take insulin, that can be dangerous. Like, there's people that get hold of other people's insulin to commit suicide. All right. You can kill yourself. Insulin is a very, very powerful drug. Like, if I take too much, I will die, because my blood sugar will go too low. I'll start having fits and convulsions. I'll go into a coma and I'll die.
Insulin
That's it.
is not
It's a very powerful drug. It's not. It's a very, very powerful drug. So I stopped taking the insulin when I got home, because they hadn't proved to me that I had type 1 diabetes, and my bowel seemed to be working, and I was feeling better. And so I went with my own doctor. We did some follow-up tests, and as a result of that, she said, look, your blood sugar's gone back up high. I want you in hospital. We need to get you stabilized. And I was like, okay. And it was only in hospital, as I was getting these very snarky doctors came in and said, why did you stop taking your insulin? And I said, because you hadn't given me actual proof that I had type 1 diabetes. And they said, oh, well, you've got the antibodies. And I was like, what? Why am I just hearing about this now? And they
the
read
one
me out the
piece of evidence you wanted.
Yeah.
They didn't tell
and
you.
what I was really angry about is, like, how long had they been sitting on that information? Because I'd been at home for 3 weeks. Why didn't they send that to my own doctor? My own doctor would have got that and said, Kerry, get back on the insulin straight away. You've got this. I'll send you a copy of your results. You've got type 1 diabetes. And that's the other big issue we face, right? You don't get that help and support that you need. And often you get medical gaslighting, you get bullying, you get condescended to, you get yelled at, you get told it's all in your head, you get told be a good little girl and just do what we're telling you to do, or take this drug or medication, even if you know it's causing you issues, or that's not, that it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you just get this complete lack of support. And the fact that, then I'm a 61-year-old woman, weighing, way less than 100 pounds, incredibly frail, is being bullied and yelled at by 5 people when I'm in an intensive care unit, is absolutely appalling. Like, this is how you get treated if you dare to voice an opinion or want to be treated as a reasonably intelligent human being and take some sort of ownership of your condition. And as I said to the endocrinologist in there, because I avoid endocrinologists like the plague, right? Because every thyroid forum I've been in, every client that I have that's had anything to do with the endocrine system says endocrinologists are the worst. Just when you're feeling great, they will cut down your thyroid medications because they look at your test results and say, oh no, now you're going hypothyroid. They don't listen to you, or they keep you on low doses because they're ruled by the TSH, and they don't listen to you. They look at a bunch of tests and say, oh yeah, okay, that's what needs to happen, regardless of how you're feeling. So you get treated like a child, and the decisions that they make keep you sick and disabled and in misery, and you can't participate in your own life. And so I basically said to them, look, you guys, you did nothing for me. I got myself from disabled 6 years ago with everything that I have done. None of you helped. That was all me. I know how to manage my diseases. I'm a very intelligent, determined person. So if you want to work with me, speak to me like that. And at one stage, I basically told them all to go and enjoy themselves.
I can totally picture you saying that.
I can too.
And I don't want to work with you, and I don't want to talk to you. Like, get out. I said, this is harassment. You are not helping me. Look at me. Look at me. I am desperately ill and you are harassing me.
Mm-hmm.
So get out.
Well, I'm glad that you're sharing that for people to hear.
It's a great example of, yes, it can be hard to advocate for yourself. Not all doctors make it easy to advocate for yourself. Most make it very challenging. But I think that, Kerry, just sharing that story shows that it really can help make a difference if you're willing to stand up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got to do it. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, you kind of mentioned these tools that you have that have helped you get through to all the crap you've been through and have been able to help you manage your illnesses and be able to live a life that's not fully, at least at every moment, every day, determined by your illness. Could you give our listeners maybe a little preview or a little quick tidbit on what some of those tools are? Pardon the interruption, but Cassie and I want to make sure that you know about this amazing resource that we are so excited to be able to offer you guys. We put our heads together and Cassie and I created our Mastering Energy Management Workbook. It is a 21-day workbook designed to get you in touch with your energy, what you really want in your life, and then give you tools to actually make that freaking happen. Cassie and I have gone through this process ourselves multiple times, and each time we learn something new and we get a little bit more in touch with ourselves and our energy levels. You can find our workbook on Amazon for either a Kindle copy or a paperback copy, and the link will be in the show notes. We also have 21 days of podcasts going through each day of the workbook. So if you want to get an idea of what we're talking about, make sure to check those out on our podcast. Now back to the show.
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that people really struggle with is accepting chronic illness, because people confuse acceptance with giving up. And one of the interesting memes or the themes that I saw when I first became chronically ill was the whole concept of a chronic illness warrior. And that never resonated with me. If it works for you, that is fantastic, because you've got to find something that works with you. But because of the way that I work and because of my understanding of how the mind works, when you set something up as the adversary, you are treating it as the enemy, which means that you're keeping yourself in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, right? And what we know about any sort of disease, and especially autoimmune diseases, is that stress is the biggest contributor to autoimmune flares. And what they all say unequivocally is you've got to learn to manage your stress. And so accepting and owning where you are, that is key. And as I said, a lot of people won't do that because they think, if I stop fighting the illness, I will give up and I'll do nothing, and it'll take me over and I'll have no life, I'll have no chance, I'll have no hope, and I'll just go down and down and down. And that for me is the opposite of what acceptance is, because mindset is everything, all right? Especially when it comes to chronic illness, because of the uncertainty, because you can't depend on the medical system, because you've got to be your own advocate, you've got to be your own dietitian, you've got to be your own researcher, you've got to be, your own therapist, everything. You've got to do these things for yourself. And you can either see that as an opportunity, or you can see that as a huge load that you have to carry. And you accompany that with the fact that most people, even the ones who love you the most, can't understand it because they're not experiencing it. Like you guys said, I look really well. Mm-hmm. I look really well. And I am a very healthy, chronically ill person. But so there's no signs, apart from if you saw me checking my blood or injecting myself, that I have any sort of illness at all. So we face all this constant disbelief, constant undermining. You hear things like, oh, it's all in your head, or oh, you're just lazy, or you're using that as an excuse, or it can't be that bad as you say it is. And are you still sick? Like, I thought you were better. I saw you on Instagram last week and you were out, like, what's wrong with you now? So people don't understand that chronic illness aspect. And so acceptance for me is empowering, because it's dealing with reality. So so many people get stuck in why, like, why did this happen to me? What did I do? We want to look for blame. We want to look for the reason. We want to have that closure, that understanding, that you're never going to get that, because the reason that you end up with autoimmune disease is so complex, and there's so many factors and there's so many triggers, and it is individual for everyone. Once you finally reach that point where your immune system gets turned on and it won't turn off, and it starts attacking whatever part of the body that it is. So the why is irrelevant. But now that I've got it, and that's the attitude that I've taken, now that I've got it, it is up to me. Mm-hmm. It's up to me. No one is going to save me. No one is going to take me by the hand and lead me down the path. It is up to me. And 99% of what I've done to improve my health is from me. It's by the changes I've made. It's by my attitude towards it. It's by me setting a whole lot of new boundaries. It's about me saying, I am the most important person in my life, and it has to be that way, because if it's not that way, everybody I love gets the impact of me being sick, and they've seen that. They've seen me. Like, my kids have had to see me near death in hospital, right? That's been a huge thing for them and my family. And when you get really ill, as I'm sure you girls know, it's a worrying, like, people get really worried.
Yeah.
And so they've also seen me rise, and they've seen me come back. And so when I look after me, when I put my needs first, and I'm not talking about arrogance or narcissism, I'm talking about the fact that my energy is gold. That is how I live, right? I don't have any financial support. If I don't work, I don't get paid. If I don't get paid, I can't pay the bills. Like, I've been in a position twice from chronic illness where I couldn't work, and I had to rely on my savings. And if it wasn't for my family helping me financially, I probably would have gone bankrupt, right? I wasn't, there's nothing that's going to save you. And that's the scary thing, right? So I knew it was up to me. All my doctor does for me is she runs the tests that I would like her to run, which is wonderful. And that is huge. I know a lot of people are saying, oh God, I wish I had a doctor who listened. And she prescribes what I need, which is now, my thyroid replacement and my insulin. That's it. Like, that's the extent of what medicine can do. I'm in charge of all of the rest. And so when I look after me and I put myself first, and I'm able to say, yep, that deserves my energy and that doesn't, or I'm not going to worry about future things. I'm going to stay in the moment, and I know how to reassure myself. And that doesn't mean I don't get sad, or I don't get angry, I don't get overwhelmed. I get all of those things, right? It just means I don't stay there.
Yeah, you don't stay there. I am so glad that we did not reschedule you today with me being sick, because there was a moment there that I really was tearing up, and I was like, okay, chill out. But a couple of things, because I know that we have to wrap up. Everything you're saying is gold.
I kind of want everyone to go back and re-listen to the last 5 minutes of everything you just said, because it was so good.
It was so good. And I just want to share that mindset aspect that you're talking about, that is up to you. That is so true. Our very first guest interview was with Nitika Chopra, and this was now 9 months ago or 10 months ago. And I asked her in a question, and I thought this was like a really good question. And I was like, how do you live your life around your chronic illness, and do all the things you want to do? And her answer was, I don't think I do that. I think I've designed my life in a way that I feel my healthiest every day. And I was just like, what? And it was a huge moment for me, because I had spent years leading up to that point of like, I have to figure out how to create my life around this illness. I've got to kind of like accept it, and it's in the middle, and I'm going to do everything I can around it. But when she put it like that, it was like, wait a second, I can live all of my life with this illness. I can choose to look at it in certain ways. And it was a huge moment for me. And it made me think of that while you were sharing the importance of mindset. And really quick as well, you mentioned that you were writing a book before you got your illness. I really hope that you write a book post chronic illness, that, you know, coming up, because I can't imagine the gold or I can imagine the gold and the treasure that would be in that book. And you clearly have so much wisdom and perspective and tools and support and compassion and understanding that I want you to write a book so I can read it over and over again and recommend it to everybody, because everything you said, I was just sitting here like, yes. And today, of all the days, was really one of the days that I needed to hear all of that and feel that understanding, and know that there's people out there that get it and that can help and that are advocating for all of us to live an incredible quality of life, which we absolutely can do. So I'm just so grateful for you coming on the show. I'm so glad that I didn't let my illness make me cancel today. And I was like, no. And one of the reasons was because Chelsea knows, I tell her all the time, I always feel better after we do our interviews and kind of like get out of my head and talk about it. And I don't push it down that I feel like crap. And I tell our guests, I always feel better. So I'm just, and this is why community and connection. Okay, Chelsea, sorry. I kept cutting. I know
I'm saying, because Kerry, you're so amazing, I want to make sure our listeners have a chance to connect with you. Where can they find you on the internet?
So they can find me on Instagram and on Facebook as Emotional Autoimmunity. And that's also my website. So it's emotionalautoimmunity.com. And I offer everybody around the world that can fit in with the time zone with me a free discovery session. So that's 25 minutes on Zoom, and just talk about what your emotional issues are. And I'll tell you which of my therapy programs, as I don't do traditional talk-based therapy. That for me is, I mean, having understanding and insight about an issue without having the tools to do something about it is basically a waste of time for me. I'm a very practical person. I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist, counselor, and a coach. So I specialize in removing the trauma of first. So I've worked with a lot of people with PTSD, and chronic illness does cause trauma. That's the last thing that I want to add, because a lot of people think that PTSD is something that happens to people like soldiers or police or things like that. It's not. The process of becoming chronically ill is traumatic, and it can cause PTSD, especially, you know, if you've had to have, like I imagine, Cassie, you probably had multiple hospital visits and things like that. If something goes wrong, you receive bad treatment, that creates trauma. Having to go back to hospital creates a lot of anxiety, being gaslighted, all of those different sorts of things. So you can book that in with me through my Facebook page of Emotional Autoimmunity, or go to emotionalautoimmunity.com, and that's completely free. It's no obligation. I don't ask for commitment on the spot. I just give you the information and you go away and think about it. And if it sounds like something that's for you, then you just email me back and say, yep, let's get started. So that's basically what I do, is help people get from that trauma, that overwhelm, that, you know, like, what do I do, the grief and all of that, to coming out feeling empowered, so that you've got all the tools and skills that I do, and you're able to, as you were saying, Cassie, like, chronic illness has got to become part of your life. It doesn't define who I am, but it's certainly part of who I am, right? It's a reality of my life. And if you treat it factually like that, I don't apologize for it. I don't make excuses about it. Like, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for this to happen to me. So I have nothing to apologize for. Exactly the same as if I'd been in an accident in a wheelchair, right? Just because you can't see it doesn't make it just as impactful. And if you just treat it that way, that it's practical, this is just what you need to do, this is what you need to do to live as well as you can, and that is your responsibility, then why should you apologize for that?
I love all this so much.
I know.
Kerry, thank you so much for getting up just a little bit earlier in your morning to chat with us. Thank you. This talk has been amazing. Your story is amazing. Thank you for sharing it. And seriously, listeners, go back and listen to the last 5 or 10 minutes of this again. It's just so good. So thank you so much, Kerry.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast and want to show your support, please leave a review, share the podcast with others, or join us in the Spoonie Hub.
If you'd like to connect with Cassie and I, you can find us on Instagram at The Real Spoonies Unite, or on our website, mywellnesshub.co, where you can find all sorts of resources and you can find the Spoonie Hub. Talk to you soon.